The day my husband asked for a divorce, he didn't wait until I had healed. He didn't wait until our newborn sons were old enough to open their eyes for more than a few minutes. He walked into our kitchen with another woman beside him, smiled like the hardest part was already over, and handed me an envelope he believed I was too broken to fight. What I didn't understand that afternoon was that the papers weren't the real trap. The real trap had already been hidden inside my life months before I ever saw his signature. My name is Rachel Carter. I served 21 years in the United States Army. I had planned military convoys through combat zones, managed emergencies where one wrong decision could cost lives, and spent most of my career believing every problem could be solved with enough facts. Nothing in those 21 years prepared me for what happened 3 days after I became the mother of twin boys. I had barely been home from Fort Belvoir Community Hospital for 72 hours. My body still ached from the emergency C-section. Every step reminded me of the stitches hidden beneath my sweatpants. The kitchen smelled faintly of baby formula and coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. My army duffel bag sat half unpacked beside the hallway closet, and my combat boots were drying near the heat vent after another freezing December storm rolled through Northern Virginia. Both of my sons were asleep against my chest, wrapped in soft blue blankets the hospital had sent home with us. Tiny identification bands still circled their ankles. Then the front door opened. Brad walked inside carrying a large manila envelope. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood Vanessa Hull. She wore an expensive cream-colored coat, bright red lipstick, and the calm smile of someone who had already convinced herself she belonged in another woman's home. For a second, I honestly believed they had come to discuss work. Then Brad laid the envelope on the kitchen table. "Sign it," he said. No apology, no explanation, just 2 words. I stared at him, certain I had misunderstood. "What is it?" "Divorce papers." The room suddenly felt smaller. I looked from Brad to Vanessa, then back again. "You brought her here?" Brad didn't even hesitate. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." Before I could answer, another familiar voice joined the conversation. "He's right." My mother-in-law, Diane, stepped out from beside the breakfast bar, where she'd apparently been waiting the entire time. She had been staying with us after the twins were born, supposedly to help. Mostly, she criticized everything I did. I held the babies too much. I folded blankets the wrong way. Formula wasn't as good as breastfeeding. Nothing I did ever seemed good enough. Now I realized she'd known exactly why Brad was coming home. Vanessa slowly looked around the kitchen as though she were inspecting property she expected to own soon. Brad nudged the envelope closer. "The agreement is reasonable." I didn't even touch it. "What agreement?" "You keep your personal belongings." His voice stayed perfectly calm. "I'll keep the house." For a moment, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because my exhausted brain refused to believe I had heard him correctly. "The house?" I asked quietly. "The one my re-enlistment bonus helped save?" Diane folded her arms. "There you go again," she snapped. "Always acting like your military career makes you special." One of my sons stirred against my shoulder. I gently rocked him until he settled back to sleep. Brad lowered his voice. "Rachel, just sign it tonight." That's when I finally looked at his face instead of listening to his words. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't ashamed. He looked certain. He had already decided how this would end. He believed a 42-year-old woman who had delivered twins 3 days earlier wouldn't have the strength to argue. He thought exhaustion would do his work for him. I asked the only question that mattered. "Where do you expect me to go?" Vanessa answered before Brad could. "There are shelters that help women in situations like this." Situations like this. As if I were an inconvenience instead of his wife. as if the two babies sleeping on my chest were simply luggage. Diane pointed toward the front door. "You've embarrassed this family long enough." The wind slammed against the window so hard the glass rattled. My eyes drifted toward the Christmas stockings hanging over the fireplace. Mine still had Rachel stitched across the top. Brad's stocking proudly said, "Dad." He hadn't changed a single diaper since we'd brought our boys home. I looked back at him. "You planned this." He didn't deny it. Instead, he simply waited, waiting for me to surrender, waiting for me to sign. Instead, I stood. Every movement hurt. I carefully lifted the diaper bag over one shoulder, adjusted both babies inside my winter coat, picked up my car keys, and walked toward the front door. No screaming, no begging, no tears. Not while they were watching. By the time I reached my old Ford Escape, snow had already covered most of the windshield. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before unlocking the door. The heater barely worked. Cold air filled the cabin as I buckled both boys into their car seats. They immediately started crying. That helpless newborn cry reached somewhere deep inside me. I closed the driver's door, rested both hands on the steering wheel, and finally let myself breathe. Then I made one phone call. Not to Brad, not to the police, to my commanding officer. Colonel James Whitaker answered almost immediately. "Captain Carter?" "Yes, sir. I received your message." His voice became quieter. "Where are you?" I looked through the windshield toward the house. The porch light switched off. Brad wasn't coming after us. "I'm leaving home," I whispered. A long silence followed. Then he asked something nobody else had asked all evening. "Are you and your babies safe?" The words broke whatever strength I had left. I couldn't answer right away. Tears rolled silently down my face. I think so." "I think so" isn't enough. He waited while I cried. He didn't rush me. He didn't interrupt. When I finally caught my breath, he spoke again. "Drive to the Fisher house at Walter Reed. I'll call ahead." "I can't ask the Army for charity." "This isn't charity, Captain." His voice stayed calm. "You gave this country 21 years. Then he said the words I still remember every winter. "Now let your Army take care of one of its own." 40 minutes later, an elderly volunteer named Martha opened the front door before I even reached the porch. The moment she saw the babies, her entire expression softened. "Oh, sweetheart." She stepped aside without asking a single question. "Come inside before those little boys get cold." The warmth hit me first, then the smell of homemade chicken soup. Martha quietly took one diaper bag while I carried the twins inside. "I already warmed some bottles," she said gently. "You eat first. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow." For the first time since Brad handed me those divorce papers, someone wasn't asking what I had lost. They were asking what I needed. The next morning, reality caught up with me. My checking account held barely enough money to survive a few weeks. When I tried ordering diapers online, our joint credit card was declined. Again and again. Brad had already removed my access. He hadn't just thrown me out. He had planned to leave me with nothing. An hour later, my phone buzzed. One text. "Have your attorney contact mine." Nothing about our sons. Nothing asking where we were. Nothing asking if we'd made it safely through the snowstorm. Only business. That afternoon, I met with Major Elena Brooks from Army Legal Assistance. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. When I finally finished, she asked only one question. "Rachel, whose name was originally on the deed to your house?" "My father and mine." She slowly closed her notebook. Then she looked directly into my eyes. "I have a feeling your husband made one very expensive mistake." For the first time since my marriage collapsed, I wasn't thinking about surviving. I was wondering exactly what Brad believed he'd gotten away with. The next 7 days taught me something no army school ever could. Escaping a broken marriage hurts. Untangling one requires evidence. Every morning began the same way. One twin would wake first. His brother followed minutes later, as though they'd already decided life was easier together. I'd warm bottles while Martha quietly brewed coffee downstairs. By sunrise, both boys were asleep again, and I would spread another stack of documents across the dining room table inside Fisher House. Bank statements, mortgage records, tax returns, insurance policies, retirement accounts. At first, I was only trying to understand how my marriage had collapsed so quickly. By the 4th morning, I realized I wasn't rebuilding a timeline. I was building a case. Major Elena Brooks stopped by after work carrying 2 coffees and a yellow legal pad. She smiled when she saw the growing mountain of paperwork. I've seen criminal investigations with less evidence. I can't sleep. I know. She sat beside me and began reading page after page in complete silence. The room stayed quiet except for the soft breathing of my sons asleep in their bassinets. Almost 20 minutes passed before she suddenly stopped turning pages. Rachel, something in her voice made me look up. Did Brad ever mention refinancing your house? I frowned. No. He did. She slowly slid one document toward me.
The loan closed 11 months ago.
I stared at the paperwork. A home equity loan, nearly $300,000. My heartbeat slowed. I never agreed to this. You supposedly did. She pointed toward the signature line. I froze. At first glance, it looked exactly like my handwriting. Same initials, same slant, same flourish beneath my last name. Close enough to fool almost anyone. But not me. For 21 years, I'd signed deployment orders, classified inventories, promotion packets, casualty reports, and operational briefings. Thousands of signatures. You learn to recognize your own handwriting the same way you recognize your own face. I leaned closer. Then I saw it. One tiny curve. One unnecessary pause in the final letter. Someone hadn't copied my signature. They had practiced it. Over and over, until they believed it was perfect. It isn't mine. Major Brooks didn't look surprised. I didn't think it was. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she closed the folder. Rachel, I believe someone forged your signature. The words echoed through the room. Forgery. Not deception, not dishonesty. Forgery. A federal crime. I looked toward the bassinet where my sons slept peacefully, completely unaware that the home I had planned to raise them in might have been stolen before they were even born. My parents trusted me with that house. Major Brooks nodded. And now we need to find out where $300,000 disappeared. That answer arrived sooner than either of us expected. Not through the bank, through social media. Later that evening, I was scrolling absent-mindedly while feeding one of the twins when a holiday party photograph appeared. Brad stood beside Vanessa beneath sparkling Christmas lights. His arm rested comfortably around her waist. Neither of them looked like people hiding an affair. They looked like people celebrating one. I checked the posting date. 8 months earlier. 8 months. I quietly counted backward. 8 months earlier, we had been painting the nursery, choosing names, listening to our baby's heartbeats during ultrasound appointments. I opened Vanessa's profile. The next picture stole the air from my lungs. She stood on the deck of a waterfront house overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. Diamond earrings sparkled beneath her hair. Brad stood behind her, smiling. The caption read, "Finally home." Someone commented below, "Love the beach house. You two earned it." Beach house. Brad and I had never owned a beach house. I stared at the screen until it slowly stopped feeling like betrayal. It started feeling like evidence. Every photograph carried a date. Every comment established a timeline. Every smiling picture quietly proved they had been building another life while pretending to build one with me. I saved every image, every caption, every comment. Because memories fade, evidence doesn't. The following afternoon, my father called. "How are my grandsons?" "Hungry every 3 hours." He laughed softly. "That's exactly how your brothers were." His voice grew quieter. "And how's my little girl?" I almost lied. Instead, I told him everything. The divorce papers, being thrown out, the loan, the signature. The silence that followed lasted so long I wondered whether the call had disconnected. Finally, he spoke. "Rachel, there's something I never told you." "What is it?" "I never completely transferred ownership of the house." I sat upright. "What do you mean?" "When I signed the deed over after your mother retired, I insisted on one condition." "What condition?" "My notarized signature would always be required before anyone refinanced or sold the property." I couldn't breathe. "Dad." "I added that clause after Brad started asking unusual questions about the property's value." The room suddenly felt colder. "So, if someone refinanced without me," he answered quietly, "they may have committed mortgage fraud." Mortgage fraud. The words landed harder than forgery, because fraud meant planning. Planning meant intent. This wasn't a husband who suddenly fell in love with someone else. This was a man who had been quietly positioning every piece on the board long before I realized we were playing a game. That evening, I met Major Brooks again. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything my father had discovered. When I finished, she slowly smiled. Not because the news was good, because it confirmed what she already suspected. "I think Brad made a very dangerous mistake." "How dangerous?" She reached into her folder and placed several highlighted bank statements across the table. "We traced most of the loan." I leaned closer. Large withdrawals, wire transfers, luxury purchases, payments to a consulting company. One name appeared again and again and again. Hall Executive Consulting, LLC. Hall. Vanessa Hall. I looked up. He transferred the money to her? Repeatedly. I felt sick. He borrowed against our family's home to finance another woman's future, Major Brooks finished quietly. Neither of us spoke. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. Inside, my son slept peacefully. For the first time since leaving my house, I stopped asking why Brad wanted a divorce. That question no longer mattered. A new one did. If he'd forged signatures, hidden an affair, and secretly moved hundreds of thousands of dollars, what else had he been hiding while I was trusting him with my entire life? And somehow, I already knew the answer wouldn't be small. Once you stop believing someone's words, you start paying attention to their pattern. Brad's pattern became impossible to ignore. Every lie led to another document. Every document led to another secret. And every secret answered a question I hadn't even known to ask. 3 days after Major Brooks uncovered the wire transfers, my phone rang. Brad. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. "What do you want?" His voice sounded strangely relaxed, almost cheerful. "I heard your father has been asking questions at the county recorder's office." I leaned back in my chair without saying a word. He chuckled. "It won't change anything." "Really?" "The paperwork's already finished." His confidence sounded familiar. It was the same confidence he'd worn the afternoon he handed me those divorce papers. The confidence of a man who believed everyone else was already too late. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "And don't bother calling Channel 7 anymore." My grip tightened around the phone. "What are you talking about?" I know you've been interviewing there. Only 3 people knew about that interview. Me, the station manager, and Vanessa. I ended the call before he could say another word. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. He wasn't satisfied with taking my marriage. He wanted my future, too. After 21 years in uniform, I had planned to retire from active duty and begin a second career in public affairs. Channel 7 had seemed like the perfect place to continue serving my community. Apparently, Brad had decided I didn't deserve that either. I opened my contacts and found a number I hadn't called in nearly 15 years. Linda Morales. We had served together in Afghanistan when she worked in Army Public Affairs. Today, she was the news director at Channel 7. She answered on the second ring. Rachel Carter. Her laugh came instantly. I was wondering how long it would take before you called. You knew? I knew something wasn't right. I took a slow breath. I need to ask you one question. I'm listening. Did someone tell you not to hire me? Silence, long enough to make me wonder if I'd made a mistake calling. Then she finally spoke. Why are you asking me that? A woman named Vanessa. Another pause. When Linda answered again, her voice had changed. Tell me exactly what happened. For the next several minutes, I told her everything. Not my opinions, not my suspicions, only facts. When I finished, she remained silent for several seconds. Finally, she said quietly, yes. My heart sank. She contacted me. More than once? 5 different times. I closed my eyes. Linda continued carefully. She claimed you were emotionally unstable after giving birth. She said you had serious anger issues and weren't emotionally fit to work in a newsroom. I couldn't help laughing. It wasn't amusement, it was disbelief. I've never even spoken to her. I know. You knew? I didn't know who was telling the truth. She paused. So I verified everything before making a decision. That sentence sounded wonderfully familiar. Evidence before conclusions. The same lesson the Army had taught me decades earlier. Linda continued. I reviewed your military record. She paused again. 21 years of honorable service. Multiple commendations. Leadership awards. Not a single disciplinary action. Tears filled my eyes. Then she quietly said the words I still carry with me. People don't earn a reputation like that overnight. She let the silence settle before finishing. They earn it one decision at a time. 2 days later, I visited the station. Martha insisted on watching the twins. You deserve 2 uninterrupted hours, she said while gently rocking one of the boys. Channel 7 looked exactly as I remembered. Busy hallways, bright studio lights. Reporters carrying cameras in one hand and coffee in the other. Linda met me near the newsroom. Instead of shaking my hand, she hugged me. You look exhausted. I have newborn twins. She laughed. Fair enough. We spent almost an hour talking. Not about Brad, not about Vanessa. About service, responsibility, truth.